Hey, folks! Welcome to the BAMF podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lafferty, and today we are doing the obligatory Stan Lee retrospective, and also talking about movies, games, and comics that we're into right now. And as you can see from my handsome 15-year-old headshot, I am your host, Mike Lafferty, and with me today are frequent contributors Christopher McLaughlin, who is the creative pit boss at Ghost Show Games. How you doing, Chris? Ghost Showcase.
Yeah, I'm great. I'm a day away from break, so hey, good times.
That is a happy day in the life of public educators. So right on.
Indeed, indeed.
And also joining us, last but not least, is Walter Billiard of of Hazard Studios. I almost said you were from Spectrum. Sorry about that.
All good. And here is my shot for my animated GIF that we can put in so that it's not 15 years old.
Fair enough. I still look like this headshot. Just clean living, prayer, and vitamins. It works. And before the podcast started, we were talking about a Rift-X version of a movie, and I had this weird obsession this week where I was reading up on luchador movies. And there's a weird phenomena where even if you go to the fan sites, they'll tell you really the best versions of these luchador movies are the MSTK 3000, or the Rift-X version of these movies.
That's
Nice.
funny. That's funny. They only ever riffed two of them, and I can appreciate a lot of them just on their own terms. But that's quite high praise because there are two good riffs. I will give them that much.
Yeah, one of them Santos and the Mummies, right?
Well, okay. It depends on are you talking about the true luchador movies, or just stretching it out to all of like any like weird Mexican cinema? Because they did Samson versus the Vampire Women on the original MST, and then they riff tracked one of the Neutron movies, and they also did Robot versus the Aztec Mummy, which contains no wrestlers, just a robot and an Aztec mummy.
I don't know where these movies are found, but I think I'm going to have to find them quickly.
Well, their Mexican fantasy cinema is just unbelievable. I mean, it it's it doesn't have the budget of a Hollywood movie, so they have to make up with imagination. And I love somebody who any film, any country, any genre where somebody's trying to make up for lack of budget by just letting their gloriously unhinged imagination run free. And in the best, really the best of any country's cinema, that's true. But there's just something wonderful about like in the Mexican wrestling movies where wrestlers are accepted the same way that you would accept like a mailman or like the cop in your neighborhood. Like, oh, okay, here's just a Mexican wrestler guy standing here shirtless with a cape, and that's a thing, and we just accept that as part of our lives.
That's hysterical.
It is. It is. It is. In the Samson versus Vampire, one of my favorite riffs is they're going through the usual exposition scene with like the police and the scientist or whatever, and El Santos standing there in his wrestling tights, cape, and mask, and he's just there taking it all in. And I think it's Mike Nelson that gets off the wrist. That gets off the riff after like 5 minutes of exposition. So, you guys need any wrestling done?
What I thought was really great was Guillermo del Toro
Yes.
in his books and adaptation, The Strain,
Yes.
finds a way to link that in.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's really weird, but at the same time, I was kind of excited. I was like, that's a neat twist. So yeah, they do. They have a section where one of the characters, the mid-level characters, um, has a secret, and it turns out he was a vampire hunting luchador at some point. So it was pretty neat.
Actually, that was kind of why I was into it because I had this weird idea about doing an RPG product that was luchadors fighting supernatural. Because there
We
was
could call it Luchadors Against the Darkness. Oh my God, this writes itself.
there was an episode of Angel where they just had a one time character who had in the 50s he had been with his two luchador brothers fighting vampires in L.A. and they had to team up. Anyway, I just like that could be fun and quirky, but I've never actually watched luchador cinema or watched Mexican wrestling at all. So I was like, I don't know if I should really write this because I'm.
Well,
So.
no offense, my friend, but I think Jason Walters and Darren Watts. I think just they appreciate this genre on a level that very few people actually do. That would be their baby. That they were the ones who need to write that one.
That would be the genre of lucha libre.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I wouldn't be surprised. Oh wait, there is a game called Lucha Libre Hero, which I suspect is from our friends at by Jason Waters and Jason. They've written this game already.
Good. I knew they were working on it because just the looks of glee in their eyes whenever they would discuss it.
Oh yeah, the cover is a Lucha Libre guy bunching out. It looks like an Aztec mummy.
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah, this game exists already. I don't need to write. Plus, and the cover says, "Plus the Devil's Robot."
Oh, perfect. Yeah, like I said, you could not have asked for two better people to write that book.
All right. Well, my fleeting notion has already been fulfilled by someone more qualified. So,
well, you could always do supplementary material.
I'd have to learn the hero system first, Chris.
Well, it's like a medieval trade. You apprentice yourself to somebody, and eventually you get the hang of it.
I could do it in 4th edition, but after that, my skills are lacking.
Yeah, same here.
I spent 3 months this year trying to learn Icelandic. I guess it wouldn't be too different from that, right? No offense to Hero System people, we love y'all.
Or Iceland.
Or Iceland, it's a great country. They have puffins. Hey, Stan Lee. Speaking of luchador wrestlers, obviously, a giant in the field of comics. We often talk about comics in this podcast. I don't have any warm and heartfelt anecdotes about encounters with Stan Lee. I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of a lot of Marvel comics. Some of the characters he personally helped create, like Ben Grimm, are personal favorites of mine. But my only personal encounter with Stan Lee was ever when I was interviewing him like 20 years ago when he was doing Stan Lee Media. And the interview had gone pretty well, but about halfway, 20 minutes into it, I was like, so what are some of his allegations from the Kirby estate about how you didn't give him proper credit? And all of a sudden, he just shut the fuck down.
Oh, you didn't. Oh, you didn't.
Yeah, I did. Then we interviewed went on for 15, 20 minutes after that, but it was much icier than it was before.
Oh, ouch.
Well, I mean, you could do the usual puff piece where I'm just going to ask you all the questions you want to hear, but I'd like it to be a little more interesting than that. And that it was in the news at the time, so I was like, let's talk about this. And he was like, let's not talk about that. So that's my whole Stan Lee story. Anybody have a better one? Oh my God! Please tell me someone's got a better one.
Yeah. So I was on deployment, and I was always a comics fan. So, but as far as like actual traditional like art training or anything goes, I was exceedingly lacking because I mean I had the art classes in school, but nothing that would rise to the level of like Life Study 101 or where you get into 201 where you get to draw the nude models. And now that I've taken those courses, there are some of those models I'd like to forget.
I'm sorry, I needed the money.
And well, I needed to learn the use of folds, flabs, and shadows. So, my fiance at the time gave me a copy of Draw Comics, the Marvel method, or drawing comics the Marvel way, and there was a whole bunch of stuff by Stan Lee, and I was captured by his enthusiasm. I was because I mean I really hadn't read much on like the man himself. The only my only encounters with him before that were those old 1960s Spider-Man's cartoons where he would do the intros. Welcome, true believers. That kind of deal, right? So, but I got that book, and I was just, and anytime Stan's viewpoint would be put into the book, it was just always so energetic. And years later, that's just a great editor and a good publicist. But I mean, even still, and anybody who's never been on a military deployment, it's not like you see in the movies. There are huge, immense stretches of boredom where you either are going to the Porta-John trying to find something to eat, or are going to the gym, and that gets you to about the first 8 hours, and then after that you need something to do. So I took up art later when I went to college. I took up some art classes, but it was I mean, I'd been drawing since I was a kid, but nothing that would actually get me any use of perspective or anything like that. And just having that excited viewpoint in the book from Stan, that's something that I can never repay somebody, because I mean, it fostered a lifelong love of art of many different types, not just comic art. So, yeah, I mean, without him, I never probably would have started scribbling and being criticized as much as I am.
Oh, cool. That was a warm and heartfelt anecdote about Stan Lee. I'm glad we had one, because
yeah,
I was getting nervous there for a second.
But yeah, I actually still have the book on my shelf behind me. And it's dog-eared and it's messed up and it's covered in sand and grime and whatever. But I mean, it's still a fun, great book that you can get inexpensively for somebody who's trying to learn how to do comics the first time, especially if he's trying to do it the 1965 way, you know, without computers and new multimedia.
Yeah, I guess having a tablet changes everything, right?
Oh my God, thank God! Because let me tell you, I hate inking. I loathe it. And the fact that I can put a digital effects tablet in, draw right on the screen, and just like tap, and a whole section can be highlighted that I can then ink. Because I don't know. What's that? What was that movie? Chasing Amy? Was it Ben Affleck?
Yeah.
You know, oh, you trace? Yeah, that's what I feel like every time. So, you know, to have something modern that lets me do that relatively quickly is a godsend, because I mean, just drawing the same thing 9 times is agony.
I feel you. Well, cool. Chris, you got any Stan Lee stories?
Not personally, no, because by the time that I actually was out going to cons and stuff like that, Stan had already transitioned into being a business. And I have to admit, I always had a fair amount of jealousy for the people that, you know, met him in the 60s and 70s when he would go speak at colleges, and like you could hear him for free, and you could like get his autograph for free and talk to him for free. You know, I came along where, I'm a public educator, where they were asking basically for like a month's paycheck to get an autograph and two months pay if I actually wanted a picture with him. And I don't begrudge the man his money. I mean, good Lord, if you can charge for something and people will pay it, God bless you. That's your right. That's capitalism. I get it, but just it always made me a little. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that was standing there, you know, with his face pressed up against the window. I love Stan. Don't I get a discount? So yeah. You know, I mean, it just, you know, it's the way of the world. So having written 2.5 books about comic book history, it's just I can speak to just how, at least somewhat, to how really great he was. I mean, it's just, you know, I mean, you study myths and legends like I do for a living and as a hobby, and you know, there are certain outsized figures that you realize are just blown all out of proportion. And then every now and again, you find somebody that it's really, 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 really hard to overstate just how valuable they really were. And it's just impossible to imagine comics being what they are, or maybe even still being around without Stan. And we'll be arguing to the end of time, you know, how much was Stan and how much was Jack Kirby, how much was Steve Ditko. But you know, Lee was the only one that had some sway with Martin Goodman and could push for the kind of changes that, you know, made that Marvel style happen, and you know, gave us these characters that were oh geez, you know, once upon a time we were paying 10 cents to buy their comic books, and now we're paying $20 to see them at the theater, you know. So yeah, just an amazingly impressive figure, and even if Stan didn't do all the things that he was prone to taking credit for in his later years, he's still just the one of the indispensable figures in the history of comics. And honestly, if you take away any of your any of your anti-comic book prejudice, and yes, I'm looking at you, asshat Bill Maher. Yes. You could make an argument for Stan being one of the influential writers of the 20th century. I mean, it's really hard to, or 21st, even if you consider the movies being made about his stories. It's really hard to think of somebody that has had that kind of influence and scope. You're talking about J.K. Rowling and Stephen King. Well, Stan deserves to be spoken of in those breaths, I think.
Yeah, that's I would completely agree.
Yeah, I had to look up who Bill Maher was.
I actually had a stand-up 20 years ago when I was doing stand-up. I had a workshop with a guy who was one of his writers.
Oh God.
Yeah, and he was like, well, he had quit because Bill Maher's an asshole. Then he was very open about that, and I happen to like some of Bill Maher's comedy. I'll say it, but this guy worked with him every day for several years and said, yeah, Bill Maher, he hates kids. He's horrible to deal with. Lousy human being. I don't know. Okay, well, all right. I guess you would know. So, or as Neil Gaiman said, more people care about Stan Lee being dead than care about Bill Maher being alive.
Well, maybe I should extend some sympathy to Bill Maher down at the burn ward.
I do like his show, and I have watched stand up back when he used to do it. But yeah, so I think that probably puts the button on the Stan Lee topic. Do we want to talk about?
Oh, wait a minute. We had Aid join us. Aid needs to weigh in on this.
Hey, how you doing?
Hello. How's everybody going? Sorry.
Doing all right. Glad
Sorry, I'm behind the times.
Well, he's catching up. I had one other Stan Lee factoid I wanted to throw out there just for Walt.
Hit it.
Okay. All right. Walt, you may know this. You're probably already aware that Stan Lee served in the military during World War II.
Yes.
Did you ever hear his specialty, his MOS, we would call it in modern terms, I think?
No, I didn't.
He was an Army playwright.
Do you have the identifier for that?
I would have to look it up, but when I was researching the Eminem Silver Age book, I found that out, and it was such an amazing bit of trivia. And the more I researched it, the funnier I got, because Stan didn't even know that was his classification until he got his discharge papers.
Holy crap! Yeah, well, apparently it's been discontinued.
Oh darn! There was another big one. That was going to be my one chance to serve honorably.
Another Stan Lee story. I was in airborne school as a young private, and there was this tiny little female trooper who was going through airborne school. She had to get all sorts of waivers and stuff like that because she wasn't actually tall enough to go through the school or heavy enough. Because there's a weight requirement, because basic military parachuting is done with a static line.
Uh-huh.
Your parachute is basically packed into a pillowcase, attached to like a nylon cable, and the cable is attached to the inside of the plane. You exit the plane, cable pulls the pillowcase, which then dumps the chute. So you have to be heavy enough to have enough drag to be pulled away from the aircraft. So, we got to talking and stuff like that, and we were all sitting around at lunch one day, and she saw me reading a comic, and she was just, I bought one at the PX because I was so excited to be out of basic training and actually have access to, any comics. And she's like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. Stan Lee's one of my heroes. I'm like, what? A female saying this? Because this is in the 90s. And I'm just like, really? I said, just out of curiosity. I said, what are you here for? And she's like, oh, and she gave me her MOS identifier, and I'm just like, that's one I don't know. And she's like, oh, I'm an Army illustrator, and I'm like, an airborne Army is like, what would be the need to rapidly deploy? But I mean, still.
In case you get parachuted into the Civil War, Harper's Weekly needs to know what happened.
But I mean, yeah, Army Illustrator, and yeah, she was actually a tough little troop. I was very surprised. She made it through the school, and there's a tradition that shall not be spoken of. It may or may not have happened, where when everybody gets their wings, you kind of go into a back room, and they take the backings off the pin of the airborne wings.
Oh yeah, my recruiter told me about this. That's when I decided not to go in.
So they get the biggest, gnarliest black hat, the instructors, that they can find, and they pound these into your chest. And if you look like you can take a good hit, they do it with a circus mallet, which we use to count tent stakes for tents. And yeah, it's just. And she was like, they went to put her against a bunk bed to kind of keep her stable. And she's like, I want the same treatment everybody else gets. So they put her up against the brick wall, and oh my God, they embedded that thing. I thought it went into her spine. But yeah, Army Illustrator. And once again, got to talking, and sure enough, somebody was a big fan of Stan Lee.
Well, there you go.
Cool. So, do you have a Stan Lee retrospective or memory you want to share?
The only thing I can say about Stan Lee, apart from obviously the influence on all the comics and this kind of stuff, is I've seen him actually in the same room as me.
Wow.
Basically, he was filming a piece to camera at Forbidden Planet in Oxford Street in London, and there was like a small camera crew there, and he was sitting against like the backdrop of all the comic books and all this kind of stuff, and he was just kind of, we went kind of like, they hadn't kind of cornered it off. It just seemed to be like he was just in a corner, and so he went in there to buy these comics, and you could hear this voice talking to the camera, thinking, I recognize that voice. So you kind of peek over, and there's Stan Lee sitting in front of these comic books, and so I only caught the tail end of what he was actually talking about, which was, I didn't even know what it was for, but he actually said like, "Oh, Excelsior," right at the end of it, and I thought, there you go, I'm happy now. It's cool. I actually got to see Stan Lee, and I actually heard him say Excelsior. So yeah,
cell phones weren't a thing. You could have pre-programmed that as like your text message or something.
Yeah, this was years ago. This was a good 20 years ago, easily. Yeah, it's crazy amount of time. But I honestly don't know what it was for. I've got no idea. But I mean, it kind of just got to catch a glimpse of him and heard that voice, and it's like that's got to be him. And then he said it, and I thought that's got to be Stan Lee. There's no way that could be anybody else. So I'm assuming that's who it was. That's what I'm sticking with. But yeah, no, it's I've been, again, modern stuff comic wise, I've been slowing down on, and the omnibuses of the old Stan Lee stuff I've been picking up more up of. So I'm reading more and more Stan Lee stuff than anything else recently. So it's major influence of the stuff I'm reading at the moment, purely because I just like that, there's a simpleness to it that I like, and it's like, it's all the classics, his first appearances of, all the Spider-Man villains and everything else, and it's just so nice to just read stuff that's kind of like seems to be a step away from everything that's going on in the entire normal world, because of divided by time, if nothing else, from everything else. But there's still that kind of like little bits of kind of like, where Peter Parker's kind of like the downtrodden kid and all that kind of stuff. There's still subtle stuff in there, but it's not quite so modern-y blatant as it nowadays. So yeah.
And how does it hold up?
I still enjoy. I'm loving the Fantastic Four. The stuff, that's what I'm reading more at the moment. The omnibus is Fantastic Four, and some of it is just so crazily, ridiculously kooky, and it's just like, okay, the Submariner's going to make a film, and he's going to get the Fantastic Four to appear in it, and then subtly he will try and take them all down before the other realise. It's like, hey, Thing, come and fight over here because there's some water. Okay, oh dear, it's just crazy, but it's so cool. Because it's so, again, it's outside of, we were getting horror comics and cop comics and all this kind of stuff in those years. This is just something that, okay, right, got a guy, right? He's dressed up as a scorpion. He's going to be a new bagger. Brilliant, do it. Love it.
Again, you will never know exactly who did what, but I have a soft spot in my heart for the books where you see touches that you strongly suspect were just Stan. Like, when Submariner tries to make the movie to lure the Fantastic Four in a trap. Because I just finished off the first epic collection of Doctor Strange. Mm-hmm. and that's so obviously Ditko's thing. I mean, there are definitely some Stan touches in there, but you can tell it's such a Ditko-driven book because it sort of lacks that touch of madness to it.
Yeah,
that wonderful, glorious, wonderful madness that Stan, and it's fun madness that Stan could bring to his stories. So yeah, I know I can appreciate what you're saying, no matter.
But again, we've got the situation as well. Is that, like you were saying earlier on, I just got the end of, is that these characters are characters that have persisted to now. These are characters that are still hanging around, and even stories like you've got situations where we're going back. Okay, right, we're doing the Fantastic Four. Well, we've got to have the Galactus in it. There's always something we kind of always refer back to the these early '60s, '70s and stuff. That's the era they kind of always seem to focus on. It's very rarely they kind of go, okay, right, we're going to do Secret Invasion in the next movie. We're going to come. Well, no, it's going to come out like 10 years. They're saying that they came out 10 years ago. It's probably longer than now. It's terrible, but they were always trying. Yeah,
they'll nick a title every now and again, like Age of Ultron, and wisely not adapt the actual story.
Yeah. But it's just the amount of characters this guy churned out, the amount of characters that stuck around this guy churned out is another thing entirely. I mean, you go look at characters. I mean, obviously you've got Batman and this kind of stuff, but you look at all those characters that kind of came before, and people will know vaguely, maybe they've heard of him or they've got now copyright because they haven't had books published in the last 40 years or something like that. But it's just astounding.
Someone did a parody video a few years ago about what if they did a Fantastic Four movie, directly working some of Stan's plots, but did it in the time frame where it would make sense. So basically, it's Fabian as Reed Richards, and it's black and white, set basically the same time frame as like I Love Lucy, and I mean, it looked goofy as hell, but I would watch that. I mean, it would probably work great as like a 2-minute interlude in a Venture Brothers episode, but.
But that's also the thing. The thing I miss about those early comics as well is if you read for the Fantastic Four omnibus, there'd be like, there's a new character coming up. It's Daredevil, and it's like, and you see a little advert for it. It's like, oh my god, this is the first time Daredevil appeared, and the universe was so compact there. The Fantastic Four was like the core, and then they had like these other characters that was kind of like twisting every so often, and they'd go off and do their thing, and like the Thing would fight the Hulk every so often to make sure the Hulk got a little bit of a boost for it. But nowadays it's so sprawling that you go, instead of just being like these 20 characters everyone knows and loves, and they were in various books. It's like, oh no, we've got a gazillion characters, and some of them you won't see for decades on a time until someone goes, hey, we haven't used that guy. It was all so tight. It was so nicely put together.
It's the difference of not having one guy write everything.
Well, yeah. That's true as well. Yeah, exactly. I mean, nowadays you can't even get a consistent of like, okay, Batman's in the Justice League, but he's also apparently in space in this book, and he's also apparently in Atlantis in this book, and he's also not Batman in his core book. But is that what So yeah, it's weird. But yeah, I just love that kind of internal consistency for the universe at that point in time. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember talking to Dan Houser about this like 10 years ago about it. We were enjoying the New 52. And some of the events right before that, because you had this feeling, however brief it was, for just a couple of years, where everything in DC was interconnected, and it was really working. And we're nowhere close to that now. And I guess we kind of bitch about it now because like I don't want to follow all these events and buy all these to understand what's going on. But I mean, for a while there, it was just kind of fun because there were interlinks, but you didn't feel like you were beholden to like. Spending $100 every month to follow everything. It was just kind of cool. Everyone had a shared universe, and they were actually using it as a shared universe.
Yeah.
But
funny enough, the DC universe online, the MMO, does that really well. Because they use all the villains and the heroes. You'll be fighting like the Joker one time, then you'd be fighting like Tio Morrow, and then later on it'd be mission like, the Joker and Tio Morrow are going together to make these Joker robots. So it's like, okay, this is good. We see play between the villains. It's like this villain's got nothing to do with the Batman villains, but because he exists in the universe, we will reference him. He'll be the guy that makes the robots rather than just being something else. And yeah, you don't get that feeling in a lot of this stuff nowadays. It always seems to be like, okay, well, it's Spidey's got his villains, Fantastic Four have got their villains, X-Men have got their villains, because they've got a gazillion villains. You don't see them. When's it ever Mr. Sinister showed up in the Fantastic Four, or Doctor Doom decided to go and bloody beat up the champions or something? It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I wonder if, when you talk about an MMO shop, a lot of times those writers are all in one office.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly.
I think maybe they can, keep the situation a little tighter where most of your at least it seems like most of your comic books are written by freelancers spread across,
Yeah.
usually North America and Europe, and so maybe just logistically it's harder to do. I remember reading some writers grousing about they were working on a big event with Grant Morrison, and they're like, "Yeah, we had all these cool ideas, and he couldn't do them because Grant said no, we got to do it this way because this is what's happening at the end of the event book." And I gotta think maybe that's easier to resolve if you're all in the same conference room or if you're all going out for beers at lunch or something.
But funny enough, I always thought that was the point of the Marvels and DC get-togethers they had at the end of the year. It's like, okay, this is the plan. It's like, okay, I've got a great idea. Let's do this. Okay, yeah, you go and do that. And it's like that. I thought that was the point to have these kind of group get-togethers. But
yeah. I mean, to some extent, that's. I mean, when you get the Halloween and Christmas issues, which are generally not, no one's getting their arm cut off, but just kind of a nice peek. Or that's what JSA did for me for a long time. Was it was kind of peeking into different corners of the DC universe, but it was in a fun way.
Mm.
But it's been years since that book was around. Well, hey, I am getting summoned back to my day job. I know we're going to talk about some more stuff. Maybe we can table that for next week. Anything else we want to touch on briefly before we wrap things up?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Stan Lee, for all the stories and being an exemplary human being, and always. I mean, if being a hero is always standing up for what was right, you look at all the anti-bullying and anti-bigotry, anti-prejudice things that Stan was for from the very beginning. It's always good to know that there's a hero writing your heroes, and I think I know we're all going to miss him, but my gosh, what a legacy!
And I can absolutely forgive him for Stripperella.
And that's a good way to also realize too that not every hero is perfect. We're just human, so I mean we all have flaws. So as long as nobody's doing something absolutely creepy, there was a lot of good that he did, especially with things like the X-Men. Referencing the civil rights movement and a lot of the other storylines like Magneto. I mean. Who created Magneto? Was that Stan Lee?
They've been Stan and Jack.
Okay. Yeah, so he's in the X-Men 1, isn't he? Magneto. A couple of issues in on 4, 5.
Oh wow! It's the
first
issues
appearance was X-Men 1, September 1963.
Yeah, so I thought exactly. Yeah.
So I mean that stuff is that's something that nobody can ever take away. That here is this guy and he was just writing these these cartoon pages and he was trying to make a change from the ground up because who were reading those things at the time? It was all of us, and now we're adults and in charge.
Well, I'll say this much, okay? I'm actually a little more prone to think that Stan was ripping off Doom Patrol than actually trying to make a statement about the civil rights movement. But that said, he did something even better. He came up with characters and archetypes that were so metaphorical. It was so seamless that you could put those larger themes into it, and it doesn't miss a beat. I mean, that to me is even more impressive a feat than trying to talk about the issues of the day in comic form.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Because you don't feel like, and I think you have one of the best lines in regards to that. Oh. You don't feel like somebody is standing on your chest beating the point into you.
God, yes.
You're reading a fun story, and that story just happens to teach a lesson.
Yeah, read X-Men 1 or some of the Joe Casey issues around the time of the Second Iraq War. There you go. Put those suckers side by side. You'll see what I'm talking about.
Right on.
Okay, and on that happy note, hey, did you have anything else you want to share before we?
That's all good. I just apologize for being late, but at least I got to say, hey, thanks.
Yeah, sorry I have to take off, but sometimes when the boss calls, I have to answer.
Of course.
All right, and thanks to our listeners, and we'll talk to you again next time on the BAMF Podcast.
Cheers.
Hey, we're still here. Hang on.
These are where we do the outtakes.
This is where we do the outtakes. Isn't this wacky? You're seeing how the sausage gets made.
This is the part of the episode where Shatner starts sweating and goes, Scotty, energize!
Did you know there's a Christmas Shatner album out? Shatner Claus?
Of course there is.
All right. And we'll catch you next time on the BAMF Podcast.